Hey everyone, this is a Waiting in the Sky review episode, and today I am going to be taking a deep, spoiler filled dive into Stranger Things Season 4, Volume 1. So if you have not watched the new season yet, or if you haven't finished it yet, and you don't want to be spoiled, don't worry. You still have an option. I would refer you to our last episode, that's episode 208 of the main show. On that episode, I not only give my own non-spoiler impressions of the first three episodes, which I had seen at that point, but I also had on some amazingly knowledgeable, passionate guests from the Scoops Ahoy podcast, dedicated Stranger Things podcast, Colin and Whitney, and they gave some really great takes and some really great impressions without any spoilers about the full first 7 episodes of this season. So if you are wanting to get that review, but without all the spoilers, definitely check that out. If you don't care about spoilers, or if you've already seen it and you just want to hear a little bit more, this is the episode for you. So stick with me here. Before I get into all of that, I just wanted to also mention that we also covered The Boys. So The Boys had a premiere episode of season 3 this past week. And I had a couple of guests on episode 208 to also talk about The Boys and give our takes on the top 5 characters of the show. And we didn't think that was good enough. So we ended up going with 2 top 5 lists. And that was the soups and the non-soups top 5 lists. So definitely check that out if you are a fan of The Boys. If you have not watched The Boys, definitely check it out. It's an awesome show. It's great, especially in the modern day, in the era of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and everything. It definitely goes a different direction, and I think it's something that if you like superhero movies and you would like to kind of see someone take a couple shots at it, kind of parody it a little bit, and just like a really dark contrast, I think that it's definitely something that might be up your alley. So I'd recommend that as well. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this review of Stranger Things. I figured the best way to kind of break this down is by the location storylines. So if you are familiar with this season at all, you'll know that there's a few different settings. Most of the time we've seen the show just kind of take place in Hawkins. This season they have everyone a little bit more spread out with some separate storylines kind of going concurrently. And so I think that's kind of the best way to get into this review and share some thoughts in general, is kind of focus on those different settings, the different storylines happening there, and the characters that are involved in those storylines as well. So we have obviously Hawkins, what's going on in the town of Hawkins. We have the California storyline with the Byers families and 11. I almost called her Ellen. 11 moving to California at the end of the last season. We also have the Russia storyline with Hopper, who was imprisoned in Russia, and there is a plot to get him back. So that's going on as well. And then we also have the Hawkins Lab storyline that kind of bookends these first 7 episodes, where we start off with the opening and then we kind of get the reveal kind of sprinkled throughout as well, and some revelations that are ultimately setting up a big finale here. So yeah, that's how I'm going to get into this. Let's go into the Hawkins storylines to start things off. Seems like a logical point to jump in at. So I think the biggest thing is that these killings are happening, and we're seeing traumatized teenagers, traumatized young people. They're the high school students that are being targeted, and the first target that we actually see is this character Chrissy. And to my knowledge, she's not been introduced prior to this season, so she's kind of a brand new character, but kind of the cheerleader who has suffered her own kind of trauma, but she's hiding it, with that kind of homecoming queen exterior that's being put out there. And that, so we get a lot of Chrissy in the first episode. We kind of get her character set up a little bit. Her boyfriend Jason is like the star jock who gives just a cringeworthy speech at a pep rally. I'm like, people do not talk like this. I immediately did not like this guy. So mission accomplished, Duffer Bros. And Chrissy's the first, but there's ultimately, I believe, 3 successful killings of teenagers. We get Chrissy, we get Fred, and then I'm totally forgetting the third one, the guy on the basketball team. We really didn't get much from him, aside he was just kind of like one of Jason's basketball team lackeys, and then he was targeted. So obviously super memorable. But Chrissy, I think, was pretty memorable. I think in the very limited time that we spent with that character was fleshed out pretty well. She has this interaction with Eddie, who is a new character for this season. And Eddie is kind of like the prototype burnout, like heavy metal. But he also leads the Hellfire Club, which is their D&D club. So definitely like a nerdy kind of guy, and he's a drug dealer. He doesn't seem to be like a very prolific one, but a low level drug dealer who gets in at the high school kind of thing. And Chrissy seeks him out because she's looking for some sort of relief from just the haunting that she's experiencing from this season's big bad, which is Vecna. And they have this really sweet moment out in the woods where you really kind of see them playing against their stereotypes. And I thought it was great character building for not only Chrissy, which was super important because this is the only time we see her, but also for Eddie, who is a significant character in this season that they've introduced. And so I think that was a great way for them to really introduce him and to paint a really strong picture of who he is as a person, beyond just that stereotype. And so Eddie is a character I really like. I thought there was not only that nice moment with Chrissy, but the way he's interacted with Dustin and the rest of the kids in the Hellfire Club, and also later on with Steve as well. He just seems like a genuinely like good guy, and I think that's something that we needed. So he ultimately is trying to help Chrissy. She comes over to his trailer park, which is where he lives, where Max lives as well. Max sees her entering his home, and then she is targeted and killed by Vecna. And he freaks out, runs away, and that's kind of the big inciting incident for this season. And just absolutely brutal killings, like just super graphic and in a way that we haven't really seen from this show before. And I know that was a big thing coming into it, is that this was supposed to be, a lot darker, a lot grittier, and realistic things like that. And I thought that was a good way to really get the season rolling and really just set up this villain as being a substantial threat in a way that we've not really seen before. It's, they're not kids anymore, so you need to really challenge them, because we saw them as kids, taking on the Demigorgon and Shadow Monster, that type of thing, where it's a little bit more abstract. This is much more intimidating, threatening, violent. So I think it totally works overall. This also leads to Jason and his group of jocks looking for Eddie, and that's kind of a thing that continues through all of these episodes, I guess, but it kind of shifts in and out of focus. I get the point of Jason as being kind of that, jock bully kid who is supposed to be antagonistic without being like the villain, and just add a little bit more tension. I think he accomplishes that. It's just like, I hate every time he's on screen, if I'm being honest. It's like, this is a guy I don't like, I wouldn't want to hang out with this person. I can totally understand, his grief and in the way he's trying to, do justice for Chrissy in a lot of ways. But I also think it's also like do justice for himself, and like this sort of self-righteousness that I really just don't like in that character. And I think, again, it's all intentional, from his speech at the pep rally to his speech later on at like the town hall meeting where he's interrupting the police and just like forming a mob. I think he accomplishes what the character was written to do, but I just do not like that guy at all. Yeah. So then the kids, the group of kids, it ends up being Nancy, Max, Dustin, Steve, Robin. Lucas joins them as well. Lucas, who, interestingly enough, he is now on the basketball team. He ends up hitting like the game-winning shot. And so he says in the first episode, this is his way into like the popular crowd, and he's trying to get Dustin and Mike to play along with it. And it's like, hey, I do this, and then you guys come along with me, and then we'll be cool. And then they're like, well, we're not cool. And he's like, yeah, but we can be. And you totally get that. I think they do a really great job of kind of painting that, high school stereotype, like, what it looks like to try and move clicks, jump clicks sort of thing, and that social stratification there. And so I think it's interesting because it does remove Lucas a little bit from the rest of the group, creates a little bit of tension there. He ultimately ends up, being loyal to his friends and who he has experienced so much with, obviously his best friends. But then when you go through all this the traumatic events that they have been through in the show thus far, it makes sense that he would be loyal and side with them as well. So they are protecting Eddie, hiding Eddie, and ultimately going to team up with him to try and take down the big bad, who's Vecna. Nancy is a character who's featured heavily in the Hawkins storyline. I think it's interesting because in the first episode, we kind of see that there's tension in all of the romantic relationships that we saw previously. And so with Nancy and Jonathan, they are now living in separate places. Jonathan's in California, Nancy is in Hawkins. And, we just hear that Jonathan's not going to come for spring break when he was planning on it. They don't talk as often, and we see both sides of it. And you don't really know at first what the issue is, but you see the just kind of tension. They're both it's weighing on both of them. We also see a little bit of tension between Mike and 11. Same kind of thing. I think the distance is making it harder for them, and they don't quite understand, I think, the intricacies of a relationship, especially at their young age. So there's a little bit of tension there. 11's also going through a lot and trying to hide it, so as not to make Mike feel like she is, in hell, which she kind of is, being tortured, basically bullied torturously by people in her school. We also see like Lucas and Max. There's a tension there. Max has kind of removed herself entirely over like her grief with Billy, and I think that Max. I'm just gonna say this. I think Max is the standout of these first 7 episodes, and I think it's almost enough to carry her as the standout of the entire season. Depending on where things go with these last mega sized episodes. I think that Sadie Sink really stands out as an actress. She gives really powerful performances. Episode 4, which really focuses on Max as a character when she's targeted by Vecna, really gives her a chance to shine as well. Get some moments with Lucas there that really kind of show them reconnecting and rekindling what was there, and as Max kind of confronts her grief through her confrontation with Vecna, and she writes those letters, I'll touch on this here as well, where she's writing those letters. She has one for Lucas. I really like this moment where he says, I don't want a letter, like I want you, I'm right here, talk to me. And I totally understood where this is coming from, because it's like it's hard to have those conversations, and she had a lot of things to say, and she knew that she wanted to say these things if she potentially didn't make it through being targeted. But it still was scary to potentially have those types of conversations and the impact that it would have. And so that was a really nice moment, I thought, for sure. But at the beginning, there is all this tension. I think the only real exception is Joyce and Hopper. But that's just because Hopper's in prison in Russia. I think that's really funny, is that that's really the only exception of the romantic relationships that we saw in the last season. And it's because he's literally, across the globe in a prison, and she's trying to find him. So Nancy, Max, Dustin, also a part of that crew out there. We get a lot, kind of typical Dustin stuff here, still as lovable as always. I also really loved the Max and Dustin interactions. I touched on this in our last episode with Scoops Ahoy. I think it really just works because Max has this like kind of angsty, sarcastic nature to her, and Dustin is this just kind of like pure-hearted, like happy-go-lucky kind of pure soul. And so for them to interact, there was a scene where Dustin's trying to get Max to join the Hellfire Club to play D&D with them, and she like played along like she was totally on board, and he didn't understand that she was being sarcastic. It's just a great moment. I loved that. I would have liked to have seen more between the two of them. Those two and Lucas kind of like teamed up as a trio later on in these episodes, and I liked that dynamic. I think that pure Max Dustin dynamic works though and I would have liked to have seen more. We also get the Steve and Dustin interactions where it's still their same kind of relationship that we love to see. Also have the quintessential them sitting in the car moments as well, and a little bit of banter back and forth. I thought that was great. Speaking of Steve, you still get Steve the babysitter moments. But now there's also the interesting like Nancy, Steve, Jonathan love triangle. But we also don't really see Jonathan and Nancy interact. So it's crazy, but they're definitely building it up that way, that it is a love triangle. And you see Robin hinting at it. You see the moments between Nancy and Steve as well. And we've also obviously seen the kind of struggle that both Nancy and Jonathan are feeling with their relationship. So I'm curious to see where that ends up. I kind of have a sinking feeling that someone's not going to make it out of that trio. And I think it's probably going to be Steve, unfortunately. I think they're building it up that way, that Steve is not going to make it out of this season. And I don't know. That's just kind of my gut feeling. But I've loved what I've seen of him. You know, just as kind of endearing as always. His relationship, not only with Dustin, but also with Robin, is great. I'm glad to have Robin back. I'm glad that they were still working together, and allowed them to be kind of besties at work. And to see that carry over into this season is fantastic. They're now at a family video instead of the Scoops Ahoy ice cream shop. Speaking of Robin, I think she also gets a chance to interact with some more characters, notably Nancy. So they get to team up and they're investigating Victor Creel, who is a man who was, I believe he was placed in an institution, and charged with like murdering his family and like cutting their eyes out. And it turns out, obviously, that this was Vecna. And so they noticed the similarities between Vecna's killings and what was described in the Creel murders. So they went and investigated that. A lot of really great Robin Nancy moments in this season too. I already touched on Lucas, and then Eddie again is a really welcome addition in my opinion. I have liked what I've seen from him as a character. I thought there was a really cool moment where they all kind of like did this recap chat and they kind of filled him in. Robin was like, "Oh yeah, you know, like we've done this before." Like, well, I've only done it once, but they've done it a bunch of times, and I thought that was hilarious. It definitely got a laugh out of me in the moment. But excited to see what they end up doing with Eddie as well. So that's kind of the Hawkins crew, the group that's generally taking their events happening in Hawkins. Let's shift gears a little bit to California. So we start off in California. Kind of the main thing is we see Eleven being bullied, and it ends up being something that ties back to her experience in the Hawkins lab. And so we see that again through flashbacks when she is training to regain her powers. But there's just this kind of parallel of her being bullied as a child in that facility to now her being bullied at this California high school. Angela is just the absolute worst person ever. And, it was kind of satisfying to see her get hit with a roller skate in the face, which leads to Eleven getting arrested, which leads to her then being taken to Nina to be trained and get her powers back. That kind of sets up her whole thing. So you get the Mike and Eleven thing. So Mike does go to California to visit Eleven, but then Eleven gets arrested, and so they're quickly separated. We don't see a whole lot of those two together, but we do see a good amount of Mike and Will together. And so Will is very clearly in love with Mike, and they set it up. I mean, there's subtle moments, I think, in earlier seasons that kind of hint at this, but then we also get very obvious moments early on in this as well. Just in their interactions, kind of the longing looks. We see like there's a girl in class that kind of is trying to like flirt with Will at one point, and he kind of like pulls away and is like, "What are you doing?" So like his sexuality and the fact that he's probably gay is very heavily hinted at here in this first half. And then from what I've heard, they are going to completely reveal a little like what his sexuality is, I guess, in the second half of this season. But at this point, it's pretty much obvious. So there is a little bit of tension between Mike and Will, because Mike is, I mean, they're young guys. And so there is kind of just like, the different expectations where Mike has the expectation that Will is supposed to be like his friend. And then now Mike is now focusing some of his energy on his relationship with 11, but Will, not only wanting his friendship with Mike, but also potentially wanting more, is feeling neglected. And so we get a little bit of tension between those two, but they do have a really nice moment where Mike is like, no, I really have missed you, you're my best friend, we need to do this together. And so I did like that moment between those two. I'm kind of curious to see how that plays out. I don't think that there's anything that's going to happen between Mike and Will, but just the way that actually unfolds will be interesting to see as well. Jonathan is kind of here. He's now a stoner. There's some really funny moments that play along with that. He does reveal, I think it's the second episode, that the tension with Nancy and the way he's kind of been distancing himself has been that they were planning to go to college together. However, Jonathan doesn't want to leave his family, and he doesn't want to make Nancy choose between pursuing her dream and him. And I think this is such a realistic thing, and also realistic reaction for young people to be having. He's avoiding this conversation. He's scared of being honest and putting her in a position that she has to make a decision. And I think it's very realistic. So I like that. I guess I don't like is that they really don't have much else for Jonathan to do. He is there, and he just kind of guide. He's very much still like big brother to Will and to Mike when they do get into the situation where they're having to flee the house and try and get some wheels in motion to get back to Hawkins and help everyone out. But beyond that, there's really not much else. Argyle. Argyle's another new character, pure comic relief. He is Jonathan's stoner buddy. Another welcome addition. I think that he brings a little bit of levity. This is a darker, heavier season. So having that really kind of sprinkled in helps a lot. There's a nice moment where they are going to Utah to Susie's house, Dustin's girlfriend, who we saw in season 3. There's a really awkward moment where Will is like singing the Never Ending Story as a callback to that, which is like an iconic moment in pop culture, really. If the Stranger Things Never Ending Story in season 3. But then they go because Susie is like this genius hacker. They foreshadowed it a little bit, which she changes Dustin's grade in the first episode. They need her help in order to find where 11 is training so that they can meet back up with her. And Argyle ends up having a crush on one of Susie's sisters, Eden, which is just another fun little interaction there as well. And that, I think, for the most part, is our California crew and what's been going on there. We do also see obviously Joyce and then Murray in California, but they definitely fall more in line with the Russia storyline, which I'm going to jump into here. So I thought this was really cool. At the end of season 3, I kind of just assumed that Hopper had like been teleported to Russia. And I don't know if everyone had that same impression or not, but that was kind of what I had thought because we didn't really see anything. I think you're meant to believe that he died at first, but then obviously with the post credit scene, the scene that came after, showing him that he's alive, my brain kind of just shifted to, oh well, he teleported to Russia because these were Russian scientists doing these experiments and all of that. But that wasn't the case. We actually get a chance to see through flashbacks what actually happened and how he ended up in Russia, how he, was kind of knocked out by this explosion. He's found by the Russian military and scientists. They bring him back and they interrogate him and ultimately end up sending him to this like prison work camp. And that's where we see him, with the shaved head and everything at the end of season 3. And so we see, kind of his existence there and his plans for escaping as well. That's kind of the whole Russia storyline. We see him befriend Dmitri, who is a prison guard, and he works with him to get a message to Joyce. Joyce recruits Murray to try and figure this out. And they also have this other guy, Yuri, who's in Alaska, who's ultimately, he's a pilot, is supposed to be getting Hopper to back to America. And so that's the plan. Obviously, does not go according to plan. Where Yuri is, I just had he's a jerk. He's like Murray, in that he's kind of a little eccentric, but he's just like he's way more eccentric, and he is a jerk, and you don't like him, and he double crosses them, gets Dimitri thrown into jail, alongside Hopper now too, so they have to have a new plan. Well, the new plan is not only escaping the prison, but they also have to escape from the Demigorgon that the Russians have, and they've been feeding prisoners to. And so obviously Hopper has experience fighting these things, and he is able to formulate a new plan. So Joyce and Murray are taken prisoner by Yuri. There's this really interesting development of Murray's character, where he is a black belt in martial arts. You're not meant to take it seriously because of the way he's describing it. Like he, beat a 16-year-old in a sparring session or something, and then he's like, he's trying to intimidate Yuri at one point, and he's like, "My fingers are arrows, my arms are iron, my feet are spears," and it's kind of like his battle cry. And you're not supposed to, you're not taking him seriously, and neither is Yuri, and he ultimately, gets the upper hand because Murray is kind of a secret badass apparently. And I thought that was really funny. I think he is an interesting character. I really like that actor. He has a role on another Netflix series called Love. It's actually created by Judd Apatow. It stars Paul Rust, and Gillian Jacobs from Community. And huge fan of this show. If you like romantic comedies, if you're a Judd Apatow fan, it has that flavor kind of sprinkled throughout. But he plays like a radio DJ on that show, and he's kind of like a jerk, but not a complete jerk. That actor does a really good job. So that's just a little bit of a side there. But ultimately, I don't know that there's a whole lot of substance to this Russia storyline. I understand it's necessary, and I understand, it's a little bit more tension and drama that was created at the end of the last season. But I think I just didn't get enough from it to really feel like, oh, this is, something I'm really fully invested in. Like, obviously I wanted, there was stakes involved, and I was a little bit anxious about whether Hopper's going to be able to make it, or, how they were going to get out of it. But like, I guess I never really doubted that, they were going to be able to get out of it. And I just, that's one of the weaker parts of this season for me, I guess, is what I would say. And then, so moving on, the kind of last storyline, last area location is the Hawkins Lab. And I had mentioned it earlier where they kind of bookend these first 7 episodes with the Hawkins Lab storyline. So we get the flashback that seemingly shows that 11 as a little baby 11 that we saw in Stranger Things 1, where they have this kind of digital recreation of her. It's not quite Uncanny Valley levels, but it just seems a little bit off. I also like later on when they do, like, she's training through her memories of that, she is represented by her present day self, and sometimes it like flashes between her as a child and her as her present day self, and it, like, she looks, I guess, similar enough with like her shaved head and everything that it's kind of confusing because it's just like a miniature version of her. And anyway, um, so yeah, we're meant to believe that 11 actually killed all of the other, like, the test subjects. She's number 11. That there's other ones. I believe there's more than 11. She wasn't like the last one, because I think Brenner's talking to 12 in the beginning, and so she's kind of traumatized by this memory. And so that's like how they start off the season, and then they go back because now Dr. Owens shows up to help 11 after she was arrested, and like, he was confronted by like the agency that's trying to take her down, and he takes her to Project Nina out in the desert, a lab there where she can train to get her powers back. And I actually think it's very interesting, like, how Brenner is there, and Dr. Brenner's back. And I think 11 has a very realistic reaction to that. Like, she is obviously very traumatized by this man. And so she does not trust him. And she, I think understandably, doesn't trust Owens enough to trust, Brenner through him, and I think her reaction trying to run away and get away from it makes a lot of sense, but she still also doesn't have her powers. So she is quickly, captured, brought back, and they kind of, coerce her, basically force her to buy into this and to trust him somewhat, at least, as they work towards the same goal of getting her powers back so that they can take down Vecna. And I think it's kind of interesting. I think you get a little bit more Brenner character. He's very cold, but there's sometimes where he seems like kind of very, paternal, but not really, because then he's like electrocuting people and it's just like super harsh and cold. And I just don't know what to make of that character. So I guess I'm curious what ends up happening with him. He could be another one that might not make it through this season. I could very much see that happening, especially with the big reveal that this orderly that was kind of helping 11 in this flashback, that she ultimately frees to try and help him as well. He's actually number one. And he's Victor Creel's son. I believe it's Henry Creel. And he framed his father for his sister and mother's murders. He murdered them himself. Obviously, super gruesome. Then he was captured and studied by Brenner, who then tried to recreate these other kids with these superpowers. And that's kind of where this whole project comes from, where 11 ultimately came from. So very interesting. I didn't see this coming, but I do think it makes a lot of sense. Thematically, I also think as like a big grand kind of final villain, going back to where it all begins makes a lot of sense. And I had heard that the Duffer Bros had actually written out the the beginning and the ending of this story. And I think that makes a lot of sense because I think this is a very clear, ending for the series. And I think they obviously had the room to kind of fill things in the middle. But I think this makes sense as kind of like a full circle type of thing. She's number 11. She's not the only one. There was obviously an original. And I think this being Creel, the original as Vecna, is just like super evil, makes a lot of sense. So the other thing we kind of see is 11 gets, she actually goes back and listens to, the advice that I'm going to say Vecna. I'm just going to call him Vecna now at this point, that had given her. And that was to find a moment in her past to like give her power and to strengthen her. And she uses that to take him down. And ultimately she sends him to the upside down. And that's the first gate, is I believe she opens the first gate to the upside down, kind of creates this whole thing. And I don't know if she creates the upside down or if she just opens that gate and creates that connection between Hawkins and the upside down. But she then sends him, Vecna, in through the gate. He's electrocuted and becomes the Vecna that we know at this point. And this is really interesting. I'm really curious to see. Obviously, it sets up big things to happen in these last 2 episodes. I'm really curious to see what happens. I know there's another season, like the series, the final season is coming after this. It's going to be the 5th season. So this isn't the finale of the series. And that leads me to believe that they're going to do something like an Empire Strikes Back type of situation here, where I don't think everything's going to be nice and wrapped up and we're going to be feeling very accomplished and we saved the day type of thing at the end of this season, because that's kind of what they've done with the first 3 seasons, right? It's been like a 1 season arc where they have a villain, they have to take him down. By the end, they've kind of settled things. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it'd be hard to top Vecna now as a villain. So I don't think that they're going to be able to do that for a 5th season. I think what's more likely to happen is that we're actually going to see our heroes, down and out at the end of this season. I think we're going to probably see some deaths. I think it's been kind of teased just in some of the comments that the cast have said, if not outright said, people are going to get killed off. But I think that, there have been comments about, you probably have to, we'd like to see some more stakes. People involved with the show have said things like this. And so I think it makes a lot of sense. I think in these next couple episodes to wrap up this season that we might see a couple deaths. We're going to see them kind of down and out and having to figure out how to fight back. And I think that'll lead us into the final season, season 5. And I'm totally on board with that for sure. Overall, I definitely have liked this first part of season 4. I'm excited to see how they finish things. And I think that will be really interesting. Regardless of how they do it, I think it'll be really interesting. And I'm just expecting it to be more of that Empire Strikes Back situation for sure. I do think that, it's tough because I have about a month left from here, a little under a month before those episodes release at the time of this recording. And I think that Netflix, some of their shows have really just outgrown this binge model. In particular, this one, I think has not, it's no longer conducive to that. Because I think you could realistically have done this like a weekly episode, over a few weeks, and then we get to kind of live in that storyline for a while. And then we're not just sitting there for a month, kind of itching to get back into it. Or, waiting for 3 years like we were from, July of 2019 to this now. So I think that would have worked, but it's a small thing because it is exciting just to have the show back. My biggest thing is probably just that I think there's too many storylines, and I don't know that they really perfected how to get us invested in all of those storylines all at once. I think there's just kind of too much going on for us to fully invest ourselves in all these storylines. I think the Hawkins one is a must. I think the Hawkins Lab is super important for the backstory, as much as I really felt like they kind of took me away from the rest of the show when those moments came up and was a little slower. I think the reveal at the end kind of made up for it. So I think, while I understand the Russia and the California parts, I think, one of those probably could have been condensed a little bit more. So we weren't pulled away from the other ones, other storylines quite as often. I think we love being in Hawkins. I think that's the biggest thing with this series. And so having spent more time there and felt more of the stakes there, having more characters there would have been nice. It's just my one little nitpick there. But overall, really, really enjoyed what they did with these first 7 episodes. So that's my review of Stranger Things season 4, volume 1, the first 7 episodes of the season. We're going to keep this kind of horror train rolling next week with my review of The Quarry, which is a video game that is dropping this week. It is from the creators of Until Dawn, which I absolutely love that game. It's like playing through a horror movie in a video game is the best way I could describe it. Like, they have real actors, they have their likenesses in the game. Really fun. So I'm super excited about that. It comes out this week. I'm going to play through and then share my thoughts next week for our review episode. Definitely check it out. I would highly recommend even just looking at the IMDb page for The Quarry, because there are a ton of recognizable actors in this. So if you look at that page, you're going to see a bunch of people that you recognize. It might be enough for you to pick up the game if you've it's not already on your radar. It might be something that deserves a spot on that radar for sure. Because not only are they're recognizable actors, there's also some actors with some serious horror credentials. Most notably, like David Arquette, who plays Dewey in the Scream series, and also Lynn Shay, who you will definitely recognize from the Insidious series. She's like the older lady in those movies, who just absolutely amazing in those. So I'm super excited about this. This is like, I think they're framing it as kind of like, I haven't done a whole lot of research into it because I kind of want to just go in blind and enjoy it. But I know it's like, the setup is it's a summer camp with camp counselors. So I'm expecting maybe kind of like a slasher feel, but Until Dawn had a little bit of a twist on it too. So super excited about that game, and definitely going to be one you'll want to check out if you are a horror fan. After that, we do have episode 209 of the main show that's going to be coming out, and that's actually going to focus on the big Summer Games Fest announcements. So keeping the gaming train rolling after next week, and so we're going to focus on Sony's State of Play actually has already happened at the time of this recording, but then also this week we have the Summer Games Fest presentation, and then we also have the Xbox and Bethesda showcase. So I'm going to bring back some familiar faces, some familiar guests to get all gamer geeky with me and react to some of those awesome announcements and talk about what we've got to look forward to in the future. So definitely not one you'll want to miss as well if you are plugged into the gaming landscape for sure. But yeah, that's going to do it for our episode today. I just want to give you one last reminder. If you've not yet rated, reviewed, liked, subscribed, followed the show, please consider doing so. Still really small, so every single one of those actions helps out immensely, and it means a lot to me. So if you take the time to do that, I really appreciate it. For those of you that already have, thank you so much. like I said, every little action, it just ends up meaning so much to me. It just puts a smile on my face. So yeah, keep up with us and we will see you next time.